The hallway at Oak Creek Memorial smells like antiseptic and the faint rust of old blood that never quite washes out. Danielle Ross moves through it at 6:24 a.m., her shoes silent on tile that's been buffed to a shine that reflects nothing. 6 years. That's how long she's been threading for lines under these fluorescent lights, how long she's kept her head down in staff meetings, how long she's been someone else entirely. Her scrubs are navy blue. Her badge reads RN, Danielle Ross, ICU, with a photo from her first week, when she still looked like she was smiling. The limp in her left leg is barely noticeable at this hour, when the hallway belongs only to her and the night shift nurses clocking out. One of them nods. Danielle nods back. That's all the conversation that ever happens. The locker room smells like coffee and the chemical sweetness of hand sanitizer. She opens her locker, number 247, and there it is. The photo of her late husband, Michael, in dress blues, his arm around a boy who has his father's jaw and his mother's eyes. That boy is David now. 32 years old. A Navy SEAL himself, though she pretends she didn't know exactly where he was deployed last March, though she didn't spend 3 weeks checking her phone every 6 minutes waiting for a text that never came. The first message, when it did arrive, was simple: home safe, Mom. Love you. She'd read it 47 times. The phone had said she'd read it 72 times. She'd lost count after that. Danielle reaches into the jacket hanging on the locker's hook, the jacket she's worn every shift for 6 years, and her fingers find it without looking. The faded unit patch sewn into the lining, so close to the seam that it could be mistaken for a manufacturing detail if anyone ever looked hard enough. Which they never do. She touches it like some people touch a cross, like some people touch a wedding ring. Her thumb traces the frayed edges. 2 seconds. That's all she allows herself. Then her hand drops, her jacket goes on, and Danielle Ross the nurse walks back into the hallway. Oak Creek Memorial is a teaching hospital, which means it's full of doctors who are either brilliant or coasting on family connections. Dr. Hargrove is the second kind. He's been here 12 years, sliding through performance reviews because his father donated $3 million to the pediatric wing and his ex-wife's brother is on the hospital board. His loafers cost more than Danielle's car. His watch is a Rolex. His voice in the hallway sounds like money and contempt mixed together. She hears him before she sees him, that distinctive click-click-click of Italian leather on tile, the sound of someone who has never worried about making noise. She's learned to hear him coming. Hearing people coming is something that stays with you from certain jobs, certain places. It never leaves your spine, no matter how many years you pretend it has. Morning rounds. His voice doesn't inflect at the end. It's not a request. The residents scatter like papers caught in a sudden draft, assembling in their order of importance. Danielle files the morning labs, potassium levels, glucose counts, hemoglobin percentages, numbers that are the language her hands still speak fluently. The patient in 312 has been flagged twice by nursing. The septic workup is incomplete. The antibiotics are wrong. She'd mentioned it to Hargrove yesterday, quietly, in the hallway where maybe no one would hear. The CBC differential suggests gram-negative organisms, possibly Pseudomonas, she'd said carefully, using the language of a nurse who knows her place. The current antibiotic regimen might not. His hand had gone up. Just one hand, raised like a wall. I'll be the physician here, he'd said. His voice had sounded like a door slamming. I'll be the physician here was code. Code for, you're a nurse, you don't speak. Code for, stay in your lane. Code for, I know you're a woman and that's the only reason you're doubting me. Now, walking past the nurse's station at 6:51 a.m., Danielle sees him entering 312. She doesn't follow. She's learned the precise distance at which she can work, close enough to catch what matters, far enough that she's not underfoot. 37 years old and she can move through a hospital like water moves through a net. The other nurses don't notice. She's the one they borrow pens from, the one who covers their breaks, the one whose face they forget 3 seconds after she leaves the room. That's intentional. That's chosen. That's survival. The morning is grey through the ER windows. The weather report said rain by 10. The triage nurse, Susan, is filling out admit forms with the kind of focused intensity that means she hasn't slept properly in days. Everyone here hasn't. It's November, and November is chest pain season, fall season, the season where every virus and bacteria decides to throw a coordinated attack on the Piedmont region. Danielle makes coffee in the break room, dark roast, no sugar, the kind of coffee that tastes like caffeine has a flavor. The machine grinds and hisses like it's angry about something. By 8:15 a.m., the ambulance bays are active. The radio crackles at the nursing station, incoming trauma, ETA 6 minutes, Navy SEAL with cardiac complications from foreign body shrapnel. The words foreign body and shrapnel are like two chemical compounds mixing in her bloodstream, and something shifts. She doesn't move. She doesn't blink. But something shifts. Susan looks up from her forms. Did they say Navy SEAL? She's new, only 14 months, and she still treats the military cases like they're unusual. Danielle sets her coffee down on the counter beside her phone, which shows 8:17 a.m. and no new messages. They did, she says. Her voice is even. Practiced. The voice of someone who has learned to make herself small. The ambulance doors slam open at 8:23 a.m. Danielle hears them from the ICU hallway, hears the stretcher wheel squeaking against the tile, hears the paramedics calling vitals in that rapid-fire cadence that means they're worried but not panicked. Not yet. The patient is a man with the build of someone trained to carry weight and pain, to function under pressure. His eyes are closed. His shirt is cut open, revealing tape and bandages that look like they've been applied in a field hospital by someone who knew what they were doing. She recognizes that kind of field dressing. She's applied that kind of dressing. She's applied it in sandstorms and to people who were screaming and to people who were too far gone to scream anymore. The Navy SEAL liaison officer arrives behind the stretcher, uniform crisp, presence immaculate. He's holding a manila folder. Those folders carry classified information the way some people carry grudges. His eyes scan the ER and land on the senior resident. Commander Matthers, he says. Complications from shrapnel fragment, location cardiac adjacent. We need surgical consult. We need it now. His voice is polite. His voice is a threat. He's used to people obeying him. That's the kind of thing that announces itself in posture and tone. Danielle moves toward the ER but stops before the threshold. She's learned the precise distance at which she can see without being seen. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like mechanical locusts. The EKG machine is already pulling a strip and she can hear the rhythm, irregular, tachycardic, the rhythm of a heart that's been surprised by metal and tissue damage. The attending physician, Dr. Chen, moves toward the stretcher with the kind of calm that comes from having done this 10,000 times. But Dr. Hargrove is there too. He's always there, moving like the hospital belongs to him because, in some definable way, it does. His father paid for half the building. His father paid for half of everything. Dr. Chen, I'll take primary on this one, Hargrove says. It's not a question. His eyes flick to the liaison officer and then away, dismissing him the way he dismisses everyone. The liaison officer's jaw tightens. He's used to being in command. The transition to being a passenger in someone else's hospital isn't smooth. Danielle watches Hargrove take the folder, watched him scan it, watched his expression shift slightly when he reads something she can't see. He looks up. His eyes move across the ER until they find her standing in the doorway, half in shadow, half in the bright and terrible light of emergency medicine. They lock for exactly 2 seconds. Recognition happens. Not of her face. Of her presence. Of the fact that she's watching him. That she's noticed something about his examination of Matthers, something hesitant, something wrong. He's already decided. She can see it in the way his shoulders set, in the way his hand closes around the folder. He's decided that this case is complicated. That it's high risk. That someone else should handle it. Danielle's coffee is still on the counter in the break room, steaming slightly, going cold. Her hand is in the pocket of her jacket, fingers touching the faded unit patch. Her son David had once told her, during a phone call 3 years ago, that he probably shouldn't have made from a location he definitely couldn't identify, that the hardest part of being military was learning to survive peacetime. Your body doesn't know the mission's over, he'd said. Your instincts don't care that the enemy is gone. You're still at war inside your own nervous system. She'd understood him. She'd understood him in a way that mothers aren't supposed to understand their children, in a way that came from a place buried so deep that it only surfaced in the hours before dawn, when the hospital was quiet enough to hear her own heartbeat. The liaison officer is still standing beside the stretcher. Commander Jake Matthers's eyes are still closed. His heart is still beating in that irregular rhythm. And Dr. Hargrove is already walking away, already pulling out his phone, already making calls. Danielle recognizes the shape of retaliation. She recognizes the architecture of a man who has decided to punish someone for the crime of being right. What happened next didn't just change the day. It changed everything that would follow. The nurses' station at Oak Creek Memorial filled with the smell of cooling coffee and the fluorescent hum of early morning. It was 6:48 a.m. when Dr. Hargrove arrived, his tailored coat pressed so sharply it could have drawn blood, his voice pitched to carry across the entire unit. "I'll bet anyone in this room $50, he announced, loud enough that every head turned, that our little Florence Nightingale quits within a week. He was looking directly at Danielle as she charted at the far end of the station. She didn't look up. Her pen kept moving, steady, measured, the muscle memory of someone trained to record vital information under any circumstance. But her pen paused. Exactly 1 second. That pause was everything. It was the only tell she allowed herself. "She doesn't have the spine for real medicine," Hargrove continued, his laugh sharp as broken glass. 3 physicians standing near him smiled, not kind smiles, but the complicit smiles of people who understood which way the wind blew at this hospital. "Give it 5 business days. She'll be gone." No one disagreed. No one defended her. The silence after his words was the particular silence of a room where the hierarchy had just been reinforced in front of witnesses. Danielle turned a page in her chart. Her jaw tightened, but only enough for someone trained to see it. The faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, the one that had survived Baghdad, that had survived 18 years of being buried under civilian identity, seemed to press against her ribs like a second heartbeat. She touched the inner seam of her jacket without thinking, a habit from a life that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. 2 days later, the cafeteria at 12:15 p.m. Danielle sat alone at a corner table with her tray, tomato soup in a ceramic bowl, a turkey sandwich on wheat, a bottle of water so cold it sweated condensation onto her scrubs. Her scrubs were perfectly pressed. Everything about her was containment. Dr. Hargrove walked past her table. He didn't break stride. It didn't look intentional. That was the genius of it, the complete deniability. One moment her tray sat on the table, and the next moment his hand connected with the edge of it, and suddenly there was chaos. The soup cascaded across her lap like a warning. The bowl cracked against the linoleum floor with a sound like a tiny gunshot. The sandwich slid under a chair 3 tables away. Soup splatters bloomed across her white scrubs like accusations. "Oh, sweetheart, you should be more careful," Hargrove said, not stopping, not turning around, his voice the picture of concern. "These things happen." 20 staff members watched. Danielle saw the way they looked at her, saw the calculation in their eyes, the decision to avert their gaze. A young resident actually turned away. A senior nurse suddenly became very interested in her phone. Danielle stood up slowly. Her left leg, the one that took shrapnel in Fallujah 6 years before she ever became a civilian, ached as she pushed herself upright. Pain was information. Pain was data. She ignored both. She took one measured breath, the kind of breath that comes from a place deeper than lungs, the kind of breath that precedes action. A single tear escaped down her left cheek. She wiped it away without breaking eye contact with Hargrove's retreating back. She bent down, slowly, methodically, and began picking up the pieces. The bowl first. Then the sandwich. Then each scattered piece of lettuce and tomato, gathering them with the same precision she'd once used to apply tourniquets in a desert 6,000 miles away. A colleague moved to help her. Danielle touched her arm gently and shook her head. This was hers to clean. "It's fine, doctor," she called after Hargrove, her voice steady as a surgical laser. "I've cleaned up worse messes." The words landed like a detonation in a small space. Several staff members actually stopped moving. Hargrove didn't respond. He kept walking. But his shoulders tensed, that involuntary tightening that happened when someone realized they'd underestimated their opponent. Danielle stood with the broken bowl in her hands. Soup soaked through her scrubs. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. The trembling, that involuntary reaction that people mistook for fear, wasn't fear. It was restraint. It was the physical manifestation of a woman holding back something far more dangerous than tears. The third incident came during the 3 p.m. shift change. Hargrove found her at the nurse's station updating medication records. He didn't call her over. He didn't ask for the chart. He simply threw it, a thick manila folder containing 12 pages of patient documentation, and the papers exploded across the floor like shrapnel. The chart hit the ground first, its spine cracking. Pages scattered across the linoleum in a fan pattern, each one a small insult. "Pick that up, sweetheart," Hargrove said, his voice low enough that only the immediate staff heard, which meant everyone heard it. "Maybe you'll learn something about proper documentation." He stood there, waiting. Danielle set down her pen. She didn't move quickly. She didn't move slowly either. She moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had rehearsed this kind of motion 1,000 times in environments where hesitation meant death. She knelt down, and yes, her left knee protested, but she had learned long ago to translate pain into focus. She gathered each page individually. She was methodical about it. She didn't scramble. She didn't hurry. She didn't apologize with her body language. Each page was placed in sequence, in the correct order, in the correct folder. It took exactly 90 seconds. In those 90 seconds, no one spoke. Even Hargrove seemed surprised by her complete lack of urgency, by the fact that she made no attempt to minimize her humiliation through speed or obvious distress. When she stood, she held out the chart. Her voice, when she spoke, was like cut glass, sharp and cold and capable of drawing blood without leaving visible marks. "I've picked up men twice your weight under enemy fire, doctor," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "A clipboard is nothing." The silence that followed didn't just fill the room. It compressed it. It made the fluorescent light seem to dim, made the usual ambient hospital noise fade into irrelevance. Someone's monitor beeped. It sounded very far away. Hargrove's face flushed. Not the flush of embarrassment. The flush of rage. The flush of a man who had just realized that his weapon, humiliation, leverage, public mockery, had failed to land. That he had swung at someone expecting them to flinch and found instead a wall. "You think you're clever," he said, his voice tighter now, his control visibly fracturing at the edges. "You're just a nurse who got lucky in school." Danielle said nothing. She simply returned to her station, set the chart down, and opened her patient file. The message was complete. The conversation was over. She had decided this. But as she settled back into her chair, her right hand drifted to the inner seam of her jacket. Her fingers found that faded unit patch, the one stitched so carefully it had survived laundry, sweat, 18 years of civilian life. Her thumb pressed against the embroidered insignia. It was a gesture so small that no one would notice it. An anchor. A reminder. A promise to herself that whatever came next, she still knew who she was underneath the scrubs. The next shift change brought new complications. The liaison officer who had accompanied Commander Matthers appeared in the ER entrance at 4:32 p.m., navy dress uniform impeccable, bearing the careful neutrality of someone trained to observe without judgment. But that wasn't the worst part. the liaison officer who had accompanied Commander Matthers appeared in the ER entrance at 4:32 p.m., Navy dress uniform impeccable, bearing the careful neutrality of someone trained to observe without judgment. His nameplate read Lieutenant Commander Graves, and the moment he saw the commotion, or rather, the absence of it, his jaw tightened. The ER should have been a controlled chaos of activity. Instead, it was a graveyard. Nurses moved between rooms with practiced efficiency, but no one entered Mathers's bay. No attending physicians. No residents. No one. Graves found Dr. Hargrove at the nursing station, reviewing charts with the methodical precision of a man who had just finished cleaning house. Graves extended his hand. Lieutenant Commander Graves, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines Liaison. How's the commander's status? Hargrove's handshake was practiced, professional, cold as surgical steel. Stable for now. We're monitoring. It was technically true. It was also a lie in the way that lies often are, constructed from facts assembled to hide the architecture beneath them. Graves studied him for 3 seconds, then walked directly to Mathers's room. What he saw made his breathing change. The commander lay in the hospital bed with his sightless eyes fixed toward the window, though he could not see the overcast sky beyond it. His chest rose and fell in the shallow pattern of someone whose lungs were working too hard. The cardiac monitor above his head displayed a rhythm that climbed steadily, 104 beats per minute. Then 112. The oxygen saturation line on the display read 91%, dangerously low, the kind of number that made experienced nurses glance at the monitor twice. His left arm lay outside the blanket, and even in the fluorescent light, Graves could see the tremor there. Not weakness. Distress. Commander. Graves's voice cut through the hum of machines. It's Graves. From Charlie Platoon. Mathers's head turned slightly. Graves. How long? The words came clipped, efficient, military. How long until extraction? How long until help? How long until this becomes critical? Working on it, sir. Graves stepped back into the hallway and his hand moved to his phone with the mechanical precision of someone who had executed this action 1,000 times in 36 different countries. He dialed the main ER line. This is Lieutenant Commander Graves, Navy Liaison at Oak Creek Memorial. I need an attending physician in Trauma Bay 3 immediately. We have a medical emergency. The voice on the other end belonged to a resident named Jen. Yes, sir. Let me find someone available. 90 seconds passed. Then 2 minutes. Then 4. Graves dialed again. This time he reached the charge nurse, a woman named Patricia who sounded like she wanted to help but didn't want to lose her job. Sir, Dr. Hargrove said the case was, well, he said it was a liability concern. He spoke to the attending physicians. Graves's voice did not rise. When military officers are truly angry, they don't raise their voices, they lower them to a frequency that makes the listener's nervous system understand that something has shifted. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? The repetition of the question, in that tone, in that context, meant, what you just said was so wrong that I need to hear you say it again so I can be sure I heard it correctly. I'll page Dr. Harrison. Hold please. 3 minutes later, Dr. Harrison declined. He did not give a reason. He simply said, I can't take that case, and hung up. Meanwhile, in a residential neighborhood 17 blocks away, Dr. Hargrove sat at his mahogany desk in his study, the room where deals were made, where the architecture of his power was maintained, and he was making phone calls. The first went to Richard Bancroft, chief of the hospital board. Richard, we have a problem. Hargrove's voice was calm, the voice of a man solving problems, not creating them. The Navy brought in a SEAL. Blind. Cardiac complications. If we touch this case and anything goes wrong, the liability exposure is catastrophic. We're talking 7 figures. Possibly 8. I'm protecting the hospital by establishing a clear boundary here. Bancroft listened. Bancroft had a wife who needed a hip replacement, and the orthopedic surgeon Hargrove had recommended was excellent. Bancroft said, "I appreciate you flagging this. Keep me informed." The second call went to Dr. Sandra Mitchell, the Risk Management Director. "Sandra, I've got a tactical situation. Navy SEAL, complications we can't manage, family probably looking for a legal angle. I need you to review the case file and advise on liability exposure." Mitchell said, "I'll look at it right away." The third call went to the Chief of Surgery, Dr. Robert Sterling, a man whose country club membership Hargrove had sponsored. "Robert, I have a case here that needs your immediate attention from a policy standpoint. Navy patient, potentially unstable. I'm establishing parameters so our physicians understand the institutional risk. Can I count on you to support that position with the surgical team?" Sterling said, "Of course. We have to protect the institution." The fourth call went directly to the ICU night supervisor. "This is Dr. Hargrove. I need to establish clear protocol. The Navy SEAL in Trauma Bay 3, anyone who treats this patient without explicit attending approval will be subject to immediate peer review and potential credentialing action. I'm documenting this because the case presents significant liability exposure and I'm protecting this hospital's interests." Understood. The night supervisor understood. The night supervisor worked in a system where doctors held the power and nurses held the responsibility. The night supervisor said, "Understood, Dr. Hargrove." By 9:06 p.m., 23 hours after Commander Matthers had been admitted, the network was complete. The attending physicians had heard the warnings. The residents had heard them too. The medical students, silent observers in white coats, had heard them. The nurses had heard them from their supervisors who had heard them from the attending physicians. The message was simple: touch this case and your career pauses while you're evaluated. In Trauma Bay 3, Danielle stood at the entrance. She had not left Oak Creek Memorial. She had not clocked out. She existed in that liminal space between shifts, watching, waiting, a ghost in blue scrubs and white shoes. Her shift had ended at 7 p.m. It was now nearly 10. She had no official role here. She had no authorization. She had watched for different physicians, Harrison, Dr. Melissa Cole, Dr. David Park, and Dr. Anton Reeves, walk past Matthers's bay in the past 2 hours. Each one had been paged. Each one had declined. The voice of the liaison officer, Graves, had become progressively more formal as each refusal accumulated. Military officers, Danielle knew, did not panic. They adapted. They adjusted communication protocols. They started documenting everything so the record would be clear when the investigation began. The cardiac monitor above Matthers's head now displayed a rhythm at 118 beats per minute. His oxygen saturation had dropped to 87%. The monitors themselves seemed to be speaking in increasingly urgent whispers, the beep accelerating, the number climbing, the visual waveforms on the screen showing the kind of stress pattern that meant the heart was working so hard it was beginning to fail. Graves stood in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, speaking to someone with a title that started with Captain or Admiral. Danielle couldn't hear. But she could hear the tone. The tone of a man reporting that the situation had not improved. The tone of a man running out of options. She saw the exact moment when Graves looked up from his phone and made eye contact with her. His eyes were the color of storm-threatened water, and in them was a single clear question: "What are you doing here?" She did not move. She did not break the eye contact. She simply waited. What happened next lasted exactly 17 seconds, but it was 17 seconds that rewrote the operational parameters of the entire floor. Graves walked to her position, not walked, moved, the kind of efficient military displacement that consumed space with purpose. "You're the nurse from the incident report." Ross. Not a question. A statement. He had read her file. "Yes, sir." "You understood the orders from Dr. Hargrove." This was the protocol question. This was the test to see if she would claim ignorance or admit complicity. "I did." "And?" Danielle's voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of careful consideration. It was neither deferential nor defiant. It was simply true. Shrapnel migration. Third or fourth shift in position. If the pericardial pressure increases another millimeter, the ventricle perforates. At that point, he has approximately 90 seconds before hypovolemic shock becomes irreversible. Graves closed his eyes for a single moment. In that moment, he was calculating the distance between what he had been told and what was actually happening. The distance between protocol and medicine. The distance between rules and survival. When he opened his eyes again, his voice had shifted into something that sounded like a command but was, technically, a question: do you have the skills to help him? Danielle thought of Baghdad. She thought of the moment when the insurgency had decided to test the convoy's defenses and the Humvee in front of her had become a mobile trauma center in a kill zone. She thought of 13 men carried to that aid station, 13 wounds assessed in 11 hours, 13 lives sorted into the calculus of triage while rounds came through the concrete. She thought of her hands, steady, always steady, even when covered in other people's blood. She thought of David's voice saying, "Commander Matthers brought me home alive, Mom." She thought of her late husband, Thomas, buried at Oakwood Cemetery with a folded flag and a stone that said nothing about what she had done or who she had been before she became a nurse in Raleigh, North Carolina. She thought of the rule. Then she didn't. "Yes, sir." Graves walked directly into Mathers's bay, Danielle following. The SEAL liaison was already on his phone. "Sir, we have a medical professional here who can assess and provide initial stabilization if needed." A pause. "Understood, sir." He looked at Danielle. "You're a civilian. Everything you do from this moment is your choice. Once you begin treatment, you own the outcome. No institutional cover. No protective umbrella. It's you and him and the decision you made." "I understand." The monitors above Mathers's bed continued their accelerating song. 90 seconds until the situation became terminal. Maybe more. Maybe less. Maybe the shrapnel would shift another millimeter in the next 15 seconds and the calculation would become academic. Danielle moved to the bedside and her hands began to move with muscle memory that transcended Raleigh, transcended the past 18 years of civilian practice, transcended every institutional boundary and protocol memo and warning from Dr. Hargrove. Her hands moved like they were accessing information stored not in her conscious mind but in the cellular memory of someone who had lived this exact moment before, in a different uniform, in a different desert, when her title had been something else entirely. She assessed his breathing. She assessed his color. She assessed the subtle signs that told her everything the monitor was screaming. She placed her hand on his chest and felt the rhythm beneath, not erratic, but exhausted, a heart working at its absolute limit. "Commander, I'm going to help you." Her voice was quiet. Just for him. Just the two of them and the machines and the terrible mathematics of his failing cardiac system. "Don't talk. Just breathe." Mathers's sightless eyes found the direction of her voice. "Combat medic," he whispered. "Your breathing. Your movements. That's combat proficiency." His voice was so quiet Graves had to lean forward to hear it. "Thank you." Danielle reached for the emergency cart beside the bed, the one with the 14-gauge needle in its sealed package, the one that was technically available for any authorized physician but would become her responsibility the moment she opened that package. She could feel Lieutenant Commander Graves watching. She could feel the absence of any other medical personnel on this floor, the way the hallway had gone silent except for the monitors. She opened the package. The needle gleamed under the fluorescent light like something both lethal and merciful, depending on whose hand held it. She positioned it at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the textbook location for emergency needle decompression in a tension pneumothorax, though Mathers's crisis was something more complex, something that required assessment, calculation, and the kind of decision-making that was no longer her job according to every official document in this hospital. The needle went in. The hiss came immediately, the sound of pressure releasing, of air that had been compressing Mathers's lung finally finding an escape route. The cardiac monitor began to slow. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But measurably. The oxygen saturation ticked upward. 88, 89, 90. Danielle's hands were steady. They had been steady in Baghdad. They were steady now. They would be steady tomorrow, whatever tomorrow brought. The corridor outside the emergency department smelled like antiseptic and fear. Matthers was moving when the liaison tried to wheel him toward transport, toward surgery, toward the only chance his collapsing lung was going to give him. Tension pneumothorax. Air trapped in the pleural space like a prisoner, pressing against his heart, crushing it from the inside. His oxygen saturation was already dropping. 78. 71. 68. The monitor screaming what everyone in that hallway already knew: he was dying in real time. And nobody moved. 20 physicians. Danielle had counted them. 20 doctors who'd received Hargrove's message, who'd heard the words liability quicksand and decided a blind SEAL commander wasn't worth the institutional risk. They walked past his stretcher like he was furniture. Like he was already dead. A resident from oncology. 2 attending surgeons from orthopedics. The entire cardiothoracic fellowship. They'd been paged. They'd all refused. One had actually told the liaison, "That's not my patient." That's a lawsuit on wheels. Matthers's breathing was becoming work. Each inhale shorter than the last. His right lung wasn't inflating anymore, just a deflated sac taking up space where oxygen should have been moving. His heart was being crushed by pressure that built with every breath he tried to take. 65 saturation. His fingers were already beginning to turn blue. The liaison was freezing, looking for someone, anyone, a doctor, someone with authority and a pulse who would actually help. Nothing. The hallway had become a corridor of cowardice. Danielle saw it all at once. The compressed chest. The asymmetrical breathing, only the left side moving now. The neck veins distending like ropes. The color draining from his face. She saw the countdown happening in his oxygen saturation like a bomb timer nobody wanted to defuse. 60. 58. Muscle memory took over. She didn't think. Thinking would have stopped her. Thinking would have made her calculate the consequences, weigh the risks, consider Hargrove's reach and the board's distance and the fact that she had no official standing to touch this patient, let alone stick a needle between his ribs. Thinking would have paralyzed her like those 20 doctors freezing in the hallway. She moved instead. The crash cart was 40 feet away. She was there in 4 seconds. The 14-gauge angiocath needle was in her hand before she was fully aware she'd made the decision to take it. No sterile field. No time for antiseptic. No physician order. No authorization from anyone but the part of her brain that had learned in Baghdad that waiting for permission killed people faster than acting without it. She was back beside Matthers as his saturation hit 55. "What are you doing?" The liaison grabbed her arm. "You can't." Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. Her voice had already changed. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a question. It was a coordinate being read to an operating team. "Hold him steady." The liaison stepped back. Something in her eyes, something in the way her hands moved, like they'd done this before in places he couldn't imagine, made him believe. He steadied Matthers's shoulders. Danielle's hands were a surgeon's laser. Steady. Precise. She found the anatomical landmark by feel, by the muscle memory that remembered every body she'd worked on, every rib she'd counted under fire while rounds came down like violent rain. The needle went in at a 45-degree angle, sliding between the second and third ribs, through the pleural space, into the compressed air that had been killing him. The hiss. That was the sound that made the liaison step backward. The audible release of pressure, like opening a valve on a compressed tank. Air escaping. Matthers's chest suddenly, visibly expanding. His shoulders dropping as his diaphragm could finally work. The monitor beeped. 72 saturation. 78. 85. Climbing. Climbing. 91. Stable. Danielle didn't move. Her hands were still on his ribs, feeling his breathing normalize beneath her palms. The color was coming back to his face. The blue was leaving his fingertips. The chest was rising and falling in synchrony again, left and right, equal and opposite, the way physics and anatomy intended. She collapsed backward to her knees. Not from exhaustion. From the weight of knowing she'd just saved a man's life in direct violation of every rule Hargrove had constructed to stop her from doing exactly that. "Who taught you that?" the liaison whispered. Danielle didn't answer. She couldn't. The words were still classified, sealed away in her own chest like the air had been sealed in Mathers's. The next hour moved like a fever dream. Matthers was stable. His oxygen saturation held. The needle had bought him time, and time was all he'd needed. By the time proper surgical teams arrived, he was breathing. The Navy liaison was making phone calls with the expression of someone watching a universe realign. And then Hargrove arrived. He came with security. 2 guards in olive uniforms who looked like they'd been trained to remove things, not people. And behind them, a thin woman in a state medical board blazer with a clipboard and the weary expression of someone who'd been called in to destroy a career. Brennan. External investigator. The kind of official you called when you wanted medical board teeth without institutional fingerprints. Nurse Ross. Her voice was measured. Professional. Lethal. "I'm here to review a complaint regarding an unauthorized invasive procedure performed without physician authorization, without proper credentials verification, in direct violation of hospital protocol." Danielle stood. Her scrubs were still damp with Mathers's blood. Her hands were steady. Her face was a mask of composure that had survived interrogation rooms and IED blasts and nights in field hospitals where the screaming never stopped. "I performed a life-saving procedure on a patient in acute respiratory distress," Danielle said quietly. "On a patient you had no authorization to treat." Brennan's pen was already moving across her clipboard. "A patient you had no standing to touch. I need your credentials documentation. Your military service verification. If you claim combat medical training, I require proof. Official documentation." The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming like trapped insects. Military service verification. Official documentation. Her military records. The records that had been erased from every database in the continental United States because the operation in Baghdad had been classified so deep that acknowledging it existed would have exposed intelligence sources. She'd been ordered to disappear. Told the operation never happened. Told that if she surfaced, if she claimed what she'd done, she would endanger every intelligence asset that operation had created. "I don't have military records available," Danielle heard herself say. The words sounded like they belonged to someone else. Hargrove's smile appeared like a surgical incision. "Precise. Bloodless. Complete. So you lied on your employment application." He turned to the security officers. "Escort her from the building. She's suspended pending termination." They took her by the elbows with the casual professionalism of people who'd done this before. She could have fought them. Every cell in her body that remembered Baghdad, that remembered being a weapon, that remembered the weight of command was screaming at her to move, to resist, to remind everyone in that hallway exactly what she was capable of when her back was against the wall. She didn't. She walked. They moved her through the ER like she was contraband. Past the nurse's station where the staff wouldn't make eye contact. Past the room where Matthers was now breathing normally, his chest rising and falling beneath a fresh bandage, his monitor displaying the steady rhythm of a man Danielle had just pulled back from the edge. Past 23 physicians who'd refused him, who'd watched him deteriorate rather than risk association with his case, who were now carefully studying their charts as security led the woman who'd saved his life out of the building like she'd threatened them. The rain outside was cold and heavy, the kind of rain that came from pressure systems moving across the Atlantic, that fell like punishment or absolution depending on what you believed you deserved. Danielle drove to Oakwood Cemetery in the dark. No music. No radio. Just the sound of windshield wipers counting down minutes like a metronome marking time. The gate was open. They were always open for people with nothing left to lose. Marcus's grave was in Section C, Row 7. She'd been here 243 times since the funeral. She knew the exact number because the visits marked the architecture of her grief, the way some people count age in years and others count it in losses. She knelt in the rain. The marble was cold. She pressed her forehead against the stone the way she'd done 1,000 times before, but tonight the gesture felt different. Tonight she was pressing her forehead against the wall of everything she'd failed at in the past 6 hours. "I had him," she whispered. Jake was right there. The man who brought David home alive. The man who saved my son in Baghdad. And I couldn't, her voice broke. She let it. Nobody was here to see it. Nobody was here to watch her fail. Her fingers found the unit patch sewn inside her jacket, the thread worn thin from years of touching. Faded. Barely visible. A ghost of insignia that meant everything to the people who'd earned it and nothing to the people who'd decided she was a risk. The rain fell. The wind moved through the cemetery with the sound of distant helicopters. 3 hours later, her phone buzzed. An ambulance arriving at Oak Creek Memorial. She didn't answer. She wasn't part of that hospital anymore. She would never be part of that hospital again. But the ambulance was carrying a refugee translator with cardiac complications. A man whose face Danielle had seen in a Baghdad detention facility. A man she'd treated after his surrender when treating him could have cost her everything. A man who'd survived because she'd decided that honor existed somewhere beneath all the regulations and protocols that said otherwise. He was passing through the ER lobby when he saw her. She was collecting her final belongings from her locker, her badge already revoked, when the stretcher wheel squeaked past her. The translator's eyes locked onto her face. Recognition flooded across his features like a door opening to a room he'd forgotten existed. "Senior Chief," he gasped. One word. Broken English, but absolute. The ER went silent. The translator's voice cracked. "Senior Chief." He stood from the ambulance stretcher, one arm wrapped in gauze, recognition flooding his weathered face like a man seeing a ghost walk out of Baghdad. The entire ER staff froze. Danielle was supposed to be gone, suspended, escorted out, her career burning in the parking lot 3 hours earlier. But there she was, passing through the lobby, and this man, this former insurgent who'd spent 6 months in a coalition detention facility before his intelligence value earned him asylum, was staring at her like she'd risen from the dead. David stepped forward from the waiting area, his uniform crisp, his voice steady but carrying the kind of tremor that comes from saying something you've kept buried for 13 years. That Senior Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross. He didn't apologize. Didn't explain. Just stated it like a fact written in military records older than his own service. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song, and every eye in the lobby shifted to the woman in scrubs, the one they'd known as just a nurse for 6 years. An ER nurse, the same one who documented Matthers's deterioration in real time, pulled out her tablet with trembling hands. The declassified file had gone live exactly 17 minutes earlier, military channels flooding with Danielle's records. She read aloud, her voice climbing in pitch, 3 tours, Baghdad. 2nd Medical Battalion. Surgical saves under fire, listed as multiple. Combat medical procedures performed in active kill zones. The nurse's eyes found Danielle's. It says here you ran triage for 11 hours straight during Operation Phantom Fury with rounds coming through the walls. Lieutenant Commander Graves emerged from the ICU corridor, still in his Navy dress blues. He'd been waiting in the hospital cafeteria for exactly this moment, his role in the resurrection already choreographed with the Pentagon 3 hours prior. Navy Cross. His voice cut through the lobby like a scalpel. 2 bronze stars with Valor. Purple Heart. He paused between each decoration, not for dramatic effect, but because these were weights, measures of what Danielle had done when the world wasn't watching. 11 hours of triage in an active combat zone with 0 casualty support. Those are the official numbers now. Graves moved to stand beside her, and something in his posture, the way he positioned himself, sent a message to everyone watching: this woman was not a peer. This woman was command. The pneumatic doors to the ER entrance hissed open. Not for another ambulance. For federal authority. 2 FBI agents in dark suits and blue windbreakers stepped through, their presence altering the air pressure in the lobby like a storm system moving in. One of them held a warrant printed on cream-colored paper. The other already had zip ties looped through his belt. Dr. Harrison Hargrove. Not a question. A command. Federal warrant for unauthorized access to sealed military records, attempted forgery of government documents, and obstruction of justice in a case involving classified operations. The agent's eyes were the kind that had seen all human deception and decided to remain unimpressed by it. "You're under arrest." Hargrove appeared from around the corner of the orthopedic wing, where he'd been hiding since receiving the call from the board members asking him to clarify his requests to investigate Nurse Ross. His face, the face that had thrown patient charts and knocked over cafeteria trays, transformed into something smaller. Frightened. The tall antagonist everyone had feared suddenly looked like a man realizing he'd been playing chess against an opponent who'd been holding the nuclear codes the entire time. "I didn't, those records are protected. I was simply," his words fractured into silence as the first agent snapped the cuff around his left wrist. Dr. Chen, the board member who'd actually answered Hargrove's phone calls, stood in the ICU observation window above the lobby. She'd already spent the last 3 hours with FBI cybercrime specialists, walking them through emails where Hargrove had written, "We need to remove Ross before she makes us all look incompetent." Emails timestamped 11:11 p.m., sent from his personal hospital computer, carbon-copied to his private Gmail, a catastrophic mistake that made it clear this wasn't just institutional politics. This was documented conspiracy. Every board member he'd called had documented their conversations. Every favor he'd asked for was now evidence. His network, the institutional power structure that had seemed so impenetrable 12 hours earlier, had become the mechanism of his own destruction. Risk management had pulled his cases from the past 6 months. 3 misdiagnoses he'd buried. 2 complaints from nurses he'd intimidated into silence using the same casual cruelty he'd employed with Danielle. The pattern was there, waiting, not hidden, just ignored. Hargrove had been protected by the same institutional silence that almost killed Commander Matthers. But accessing a senior chief petty officer's sealed military records? Attempting to forge documents to support his narrative? That wasn't hospital politics. That was federal crime. That was treason adjacent. That was the moment private institutional power crashed into actual government machinery, and the government machinery had already won. The second FBI agent read him his rights as they walked past the nurse's station. Past the place where Hargrove had publicly announced his bet that Danielle would quit within a week. Past the ER entrance where Danielle now stood, still in her scrubs, still carrying that same measured composure, the kind that doesn't celebrate, doesn't gloat, doesn't require recognition. Just presence. Just unwavering calm in the wreckage. Hargrove's eyes found hers for exactly 1 second. In that 1 second, he understood, she'd never been afraid of him. Not for a moment. She'd just been waiting. The doors closed behind the FBI agents and their prisoner. The lobby exhaled slowly, like a held breath finally released. Danielle turned to David, and her son stepped forward, pulling her into an embrace that carried 13 years of knowing his mother was more than what she'd been allowed to become. The translator still stood by the ambulance stretcher, tears running down his scarred face, whispering in broken English, "Thank you. Thank you, Senior Chief." 6 months later, David sent his mother a photograph. 2 images side by side, telling the story the way only contrasts can. The first, Dr. Hargrove in a faded polo shirt and khaki pants, standing before a community college classroom, teaching CPR certification to students who had no idea they were learning from a suspended physician. Minimum wage. No prospects. No network. No power. The second, Danielle in dress blue so crisp they could cut glass, standing at attention at the Pentagon as a 3-star admiral approached with medals suspended from ribbons. The Navy Cross, the highest award for valor a sailor could receive short of the Medal of Honor, hung first. Then the Bronze Stars, their distinctive V4 valor insignia catching light. Then the Purple Heart, that quiet symbol of blood spilled in service. The flash photography caught her face in profile, and if you looked closely enough, you could see where her jaw tightened, not in emotion, but in recognition. In the moment of finally carrying what she'd earned. Commander Matthers stood beside her in his own Navy dress uniform, the scar tissue around his eyes barely visible beneath dress glasses. The cardiac surgeon Danielle had recommended had restored his sight 6 weeks into recovery, 95% vision restored, the shrapnel successfully navigated by hands that had learned precision from watching a nurse perform miracles in hallways while 20 doctors walked away. Matthers raised his right hand in salute as the photographer captured the moment, and behind them both, mounted under museum-quality glass on the Pentagon wall, was the faded unit patch from Baghdad. The one Danielle had kept sewn inside her jacket lining for 13 years. The one she'd never been allowed to display. The one that proved it all happened, that she was real, that a woman in scrubs had once been a warrior in a kill zone where the rules of medicine collided with the rules of war and someone had to choose. The Admiral leaned close as the ceremonial photography concluded, his 3-star shoulder boards catching the light like they contained actual authority. Senior Chief, 20 doctors made the safe choice that day. They followed protocol, protected their careers, avoided the liability. You did what the warriors I know do, you saved a man's life and didn't ask for permission. Danielle's hand moved unconsciously to where that patch used to rest against her ribs, sewn inside every jacket she'd worn since returning from Baghdad. Finding only silk now. Finding only the weight of 13 years of silence, finally lifting. That evening, back in Raleigh, Danielle visited her husband's grave for the first time since that rain-soaked night 3 months earlier. But this time, the sun was setting orange and gold across the cemetery stones. She placed her Navy Cross against the marble, the highest medal, not the most personal, but the most public. The one that said to the world, she was here, she was real, she was legendary. I got him home, love, she whispered to the granite. Jake's alive because I remembered what you taught me. She straightened, turned to walk back toward the parking lot where David waited in his truck, then paused at the edge of the cemetery drive. One final sentence escaped like breath. True class is what you do when the lights go out. The words echoed off the headstones, and she didn't look back. David drove her to Raleigh Prime, where Commander Matthers had reserved a table at 7 p.m. Not to celebrate. Just to sit with the people who'd saved each other's lives, who'd held each other's secrets, who understood that some bonds are forged hotter and deeper than anything the ordinary world could understand. Matthers stood when she entered the restaurant, and for the first time, he didn't feel the phantom presence of darkness behind his eyes. He could see her fully, the nurse who'd been a warrior, the warrior who'd chosen to be a nurse, the woman who'd refused to become small. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that the quietest people carry the greatest strength. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated and vindicated. Comment below, would you have saved him, or would you have walked away?